You're live.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is the Joint Legislative Management Committee meeting on Thursday, February 29th. We have one agenda item, which is to review and vote on the Capitol Police Department body camera policy. And we have here with us to walk us through the policy. Sorry, it's a little, cozy.
That's fine. I like cozy. Well, good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. I'll give a little bit of background first to kind of set the scene and the context for why this is here in front of you this morning and why it might be kind of a critical decision at this point. Annually, law enforcement agencies have to file an affidavit of compliance with Rule 13 with the Criminal Justice Council. And your hardworking, diligent, and responsible Capitol Police officers raised to my attention earlier this month that they did not believe that their records retention component of the body-worn camera policy currently in effect was in compliance, and they could not check that box on the Rule 13 affidavit. I reviewed the records retention policy and worked with the Criminal Justice Council, who informed me that in fact the policy was completely out of compliance with what was required under Rule 13 because there was a new statewide
Mute that or something.
model policy that needed to be adopted by every law enforcement agency of the state as of 2022.
Yeah, there's a lot of
So,
that.
working from that point on, it was clear that the Capitol Police Department had to adopt this model policy essentially verbatim, with very few conforming amendments to make sure that it fit first with the structures of the General Assembly's law enforcement agency, the Capitol Police Department, which is embedded within the Sergeant at Arms. And second, to clean up some internal inconsistencies and make it readable for the officers so that they knew how to comply with, for example, instances where there's Public Records Act requests for body camera footage. So what you have in front of you is the model policy updated to include the appropriate terms. So the Capitol Police Department, when it refers to the head of the agency as a licensed law enforcement officer, it refers in this policy to the chief. And when there was a case where it referred to the head of the agency for purposes of administrative matters, this policy refers to the Sergeant at Arms. Otherwise, it is completely consistent with the statewide model policy. Today is the deadline to file the Rule 13 affidavit. So we have prepared the interim chief with two filings. One filing stating that the Capitol Police Department is in fact in compliance, and that would require the adoption of this policy. And the second route is a request for a waiver of the Rule 13 affidavit for this year, so that the committee has an opportunity, if you choose, to adopt this at a later date.
Does anyone have any questions?
Well, I had reviewed it and I had some questions about the terminology, but
Sure.
Tucker has clarified it. Because particularly around the responsibilities of the chief, because under the chief, then it's the department and then it goes back in 3 and 4, the chief. But he explained why. I was like, why isn't there consistency? And it got into the department. Although here we talk about the Sergeant at Arms, which should we say the Sergeant at Arms is, I don't know, the department is headed by the Sergeant at Arms. So it was unclear to me when I was reading it, why are we changing the references here? I don't know if it makes any difference to this section because we have to follow the modern policy. And then I thought number 5 was really redundant, and that is the chief is responsible for the things he's responsible for. But I understand that's the model policy, so I'm willing to declare a victory on that. And the only other one was retention and release, which is on the next to last page. And my question was, where is that retention schedule? Does it exist? And I guess if there is a schedule, and it does exist.
So under the policy that was approved by Jlmc in 2021, there is a records retention policy. It is brief. It is more, I would say, onerous than the model retention policies that are used by law enforcement agencies. It has longer retention periods. I can send that to the committee for your reference. The Capitol Police Department does want to work on an updated retention schedule that will tread some sort of line between the current retention periods and what is required under the model policy and the recommendations from the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration.
That was just notes that I had when I reviewed it.
Question, just in revisions or additions or changes to this at a later date, does that require anything other than the chief's ability to do that? Does anything have to come back to us, for example?
It is my understanding that this committee would have to approve any updates to the policy. There's a provision in here specifically vesting the authority to request those changes from you in the Sergeant at Arms.
Representative Shaw?
Thanks. So this is, just to be clear, this is modeled after the statewide Jlmc program and just customized it to fit in this building.
That is correct.
So I would like to ask Senator Natter to say, is this familiar to you from the previous life?
Yeah, it is. I was actually just thinking that, getting a flashback, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there was some parts that I think, wouldn't necessarily apply, like waiting for a funeral home, or, so,
Turning.
but I think that, I mean, having that in there is not necessarily, it's not going to cause a problem, but I can see how maybe there's some work later on that can be used to change, but it seems pretty standard.
Thank you. And then I guess my other question that I had, on page 2, down around, the B1, it talks about between an officer and a member of the public. So at that point, are we all in the building considered members of the public?
Is that for me? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were still asking me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Under the terms of the policy, it's anyone who is not a law enforcement officer.
Okay.
However, this is about in law enforcement encounters between the officer and members of the public. So,
Which could be a legislature.
which could be a
Could be
legislative,
but
but
the chances are,
Okay. Representative Wood, did you have a question?
I think that Tucker has answered the questions. I had some questions around why it says Sergeant Arms in a couple of places. It seemed rather very defined, but you explained why that was. And for those of us who haven't been at sort of long-term on Jlmc, it's helpful to know that this is a revision of an existing policy. So when I was first reading it, I'm thinking like, this is a brand new policy. There's a lot of stuff in here that I need to ask a lot of questions about. I don't really understand. Would have been helpful to know that in that sort of email that forwarded this to some of us who were newer, but yeah. So this is, thank you for your explanation.
We need a motion then to approve the.
To adopt the-
To adopt this
yep.
policy. I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Senator Tipton. Any further discussion?
one more question.
Oh, you have the slide.
How long is, how long is this good for? Does it have a time frame involved with it?
it does not.
Starting today.
And in effect moving forward.
Until modified.
Until modified, and the statute that directs the Criminal Justice Council to adopt this policy is binding on the Capitol Police Department. So if there are any updates at the CJC level, this will have to be amended accordingly. And this is a floor. So if there are any provisions of this policy that the committee or that the Sergeant at Arms recommends being more restrictive, that can happen in the future as well. This is the baseline requirements at a state level.
Any further questions for
One
Tucker?
question, and that is, I see there's a provision that exceptions to the policy can be made by the head of the agency, which would presumably be the Sergeant at Arms. And typically, if you have someone working in plain clothes, if you have had a detective in the department, you don't now, could there be an effective blanket exemption that those people in those don't wear body cameras? Which my understanding is most agencies do in fact have that exception.
My knowledge about that is not nuanced enough to be able to answer that question for you, but it's something that can absolutely look into and follow up with you.
All right, any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Tucker. I will call the roll. Senator Baruch,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Sheen,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Representative James,
Yes.
Representative Shaw,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Motion carries 0. Thank you very much, everyone. That is our work for today. Be on the lookout. We will be needing to have a meeting to review some other policies when we get back from town meeting week. So we'll send you an email with that information. And with that,